Rain had been falling since morning, a slow, cold drizzle that turned the Tennessee clay into sucking mud and made every step sound like a wound opening. Martha June stood barefoot in the yard, her dress clinging to her body like it hated her. The wet fabric showed every curve she tried to hide, every mistake her mother wanted gone. The older woman's hand gripped Martha's wrist, so tight it left red marks, pulling her toward the waiting wagon, as if the girl might change her mind about being traded. "They'll be here soon," her mother hissed, eyes darting toward the road. "Straighten yourself. Don't you go crying now. You made your bed." Martha didn't answer. The air smelled of manure and rain, of something dying in the distance. Behind her, the old house loomed, gray wood and broken shutters trembling in the wind. A single lantern flickered in the window where her younger brothers watched, their faces pale and curious. Her father hadn't come out at all. He'd said his part last night, said he'd rather see her in a grave than in his home again. A wagon creaked up the muddy path, drawn by a pair of weary mules. The driver was a mountain of a man, his frame filling the bench seat, broad shoulders rising like cliffs beneath a slick oilskin coat. He didn't wave, didn't even look at them until he'd climbed down, boots sinking deep into the mud. His face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, beard thick and untamed. When he finally met Martha's eyes, she felt the air in her chest catch, not from fear, but from the weight of his silence. "This him?" she heard herself whisper. Her mother nodded, wiping her hands on her apron as though shaking off the shame. "Eli Harker. He runs cattle up near the ridge. Lost his wife. Lives alone." She forced a brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He needs help on his land. And I can't keep her here, Mr. Harker. Not with folks talking." Eli's gaze shifted from mother to daughter. Rain ran down his beard in thin black lines. "You said she could work," he said, voice low, unhurried, like gravel rolling down a dry creek bed. "She can." The woman's tone turned sharp, defensive. "She's strong, eats like a man. You'll get your worth out of her." He didn't reply. He turned, trudged to the back of his wagon, and uncovered a tarp. Beneath it stood a brown cow, thin but alive, tethered with a frayed rope. The animal moved softly, steam rising from her wet hide. "That's her," the mother said quickly. "Daisy. She's a good milker." Eli's eyes returned to Martha. Then it settled. Her mother forced a brittle laugh, but there was no mirth in it, only relief. She gestured toward the wagon. "Go on now, girl. Don't make this harder than it's got to be." Martha stood frozen. The rain chilled her skin, but inside she burned. She wanted to scream, to run, to ask her mother how she could trade her own child for a cow. But she saw the truth in her mother's face. Fear, pride, and something else too small to name. Shame, maybe, the kind that eats you alive. Eli reached out his hand, palm up. "Come on," he said simply. Martha hesitated, then placed her trembling fingers into his. His hand swallowed hers whole, rough, calloused, but not cruel. He helped her onto the wagon, lifted her as if she weighed nothing. The boards creaked beneath her, and the cow snorted softly beside her. Her mother stepped back, clutching her apron to her chest. "Mind yourself," she said. "Do what he says." Martha looked down at her, rain dripping from her lashes. "Mama," she whispered, "what if I—" "Don't you call me that." Her mother snapped. "Not after what you've done." The words cut clean. The wagon lurched forward, and before Martha could speak again, the house was already fading into mist. They rode for hours. The rain thinned, but the clouds hung low, pressing against the earth like a shroud. Martha watched the trees change, oak giving way to pine, the soil darkening, the air turning colder. Eli said nothing. His hat brim dripped steadily, and his shoulders hunched as if the world were a weight he carried willingly. She tried to speak once. "You don't have to keep me," she murmured. "You can drop me at the next town. I'll find work." His eyes stayed on the road. "A deal's a deal." Silence again. After a while, she gathered courage. Do you know what she told you about me?" "She said you could work." Martha gave a bitter laugh. "That's one way to say it." He glanced at her then, just once. You run from something. She stared at the mud flying from a mule's hooves. Got caught before I could. He didn't ask more, and she was grateful. By the time the sun began to set, her hands were stiff from cold. They reached a stretch of open plain where the land rolled out endless and raw. Grass slick with rain, and the horizon cut sharp against the sky. In the distance stood a cluster of buildings, a barn, a cabin, a corral leaning like it might fall with the next wind. Smoke rose thin from a chimney. Eli pulled the wagon to a stop near the barn. This is it. Martha stared. The place looked half dead. Fence posts rotted. The barn door hung on one hinge. Yet there was something alive in the silence, something that felt steadier than anything she'd known. He helped her down. You'll stay in the house, he said. Work starts early. I'll show you where things are come morning. She nodded, shivering. Yes, sir. Inside, the cabin was plain but neat. A fire crackled weakly in the hearth. The scent of coffee and smoke filled the room. 2 chairs. 1 table. A single bed pushed against the far wall. He gestured toward a smaller door. There's a spare room. It ain't much, but it's yours. Martha stepped inside. The bed was rough but clean, a patchwork quilt folded neatly at the foot. She ran her fingers over it, feeling the stitches. For the first time all day, she exhaled. When she came back to the main room, Eli was at the stove, frying something in a pan. The sound of sizzling fat filled the quiet. He glanced at her. You eat? Not since morning. He nodded once, slid a plate toward her, salt pork beans and a slice of cornbread. She sat across from him. The only sound was the wind outside and the scrape of forks against tin plates. Halfway through the meal, she said softly, Why'd you do it? Take me, I mean. He chewed slow, swallowed. Needed help. Don't like town talk. Figured you didn't either. That was all. No pity, no judgment. Just fact. She looked down at her food, unsure if she wanted to cry or laugh. When the meal was done, he rose and stepped outside, without a word. She heard him checking the barn, his boots crunching on gravel. She washed the plates, her hands moving automatically, her mind spinning with everything left unsaid. Later, when she lay on the bed, the quilt pulled her chin. She listened to the wind rattle the shutters. Her belly shifted beneath her palm, the child moving, alive. She whispered to it, voice breaking. You and me, little one, we're all we got now. Outside, the coyotes howled. She drifted to sleep, dreaming of her mother's face twisted in the rain, of the cow's soft eyes, of the man who said nothing but saw too much. At dawn, the rooster's cry yanked her awake. The world smelled of wet hay and smoke. She rose, washed her face with cold water, and stepped outside. The air bit her skin. Eli was already in the yard, splitting logs. His shirt clung to his back, muscles bunching with each swing. Steam rose from his breath. He paused when he saw her. You can feed the chickens, he said. Barns to the left. She nodded, pulling her shawl tighter. The chickens scattered at her approach, feathers flashing white in the morning light. She gathered eggs, tried not to think of the ache in her lower back or the steady reminder beneath her ribs that she carried life. Hours passed. She mended a fence, milked the cow, Daisy, the one her mother had traded her for. The irony wasn't lost on her. The animal's breath fogged against her hand, warm and steady. For a moment, she felt almost at peace. Eli returned near noon, a bundle of feed over his shoulder. You work quiet, he said. She wasn't sure if it was a compliment, but she smiled faintly. Quiet's all I got left. He gave a small nod. Ain't the worst thing to have. That night, the air turned colder. The moon hung pale and swollen above the ridge. Martha couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind whisper through the cracks. Then she heard it, a low growl, distant but sharp. She sat up. Another growl followed, closer this time. The cow in the barn bellowed, frantic. Eli's boots hit the porch outside. Stay inside, he called, voice rough but steady. She went to the window anyway. Through the glass, she saw him, rifle in hand, body tall and solid against the moonlight. Shadows moved along the tree line. Wolves. 3, maybe 4. He fired once. The echo rolled through the valley like thunder. The wolves scattered, their cries fading into the dark. When he came back inside, she was waiting by the fire, hands clenched around a blanket. "Wolves," he said simply, hanging his rifle on the wall. "They come close when they smell something new." His eyes flicked to her stomach, then away again. "They'll learn to keep off." Martha swallowed hard. "You could have been hurt." He shrugged. "Not tonight." He moved to the window, checking the yard once more. She watched him, this giant of a man who bought her with a cow and given her a bed instead of chain. Something stirred inside her. Fear, gratitude, confusion, maybe all three. When he finally turned back toward his room, he paused. "You did good work today," he said. It was nothing, just 5 quiet words, but they filled a hollow space inside her where her mother's love should have been. After he shut his door, Martha sat by the fire a long time, listening to the logs crackle. Her reflection danced in flames, round-faced, tired eyes, but alive. She thought of the road behind her, the house she'd left, the life she'd been sold out of. For the first time, she didn't feel like a ghost walking someone else's world. Outside, the coyotes began to cry again, far off this time. She pulled the blanket tighter, whispering into flickering light, "We'll make it, little one. Somehow we'll make it." And as the fire burned lower and the night swallowed the cabin whole, Martha June realized that the danger she feared most wasn't the man she'd been sold to. It was a world beyond his door, a world that would never forgive her for surviving. She looked once more toward the closed door of his room, heard the slow rhythm of his breathing through the wall, steady and deep. It sounded like safety, or maybe just something close enough. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew this much. She wasn't going back. The wind sighed through the cracks, and somewhere out in the Black Hills, a wolf howled once, long and low, before the silence returned. The winter sun rose pale and cold over the ridge, its light cutting across the valley in thin, silver bands. Martha June stirred before dawn, her body heavy with the weight of the child inside her and the ache of another sleepless night. The cabin smelled of ash and bread, the faint trace of smoke clinging to her hair. Outside, Eli's axe split with a rhythm that had become as steady as her own heartbeat. She wrapped herself in her shawl, tied her hair back, and stepped into the morning, frost bit at her cheeks. The world felt sharper here, every sound closer, every silence deeper. Eli glanced up from the woodpile when he saw her, eyes squinting beneath his hat brim. "Water trough's frozen," he said. "Chickens won't drink till it's broke." She nodded, already reaching for the iron bar by the shed. Her hands ached, her back protested, but she didn't slow. It had been weeks since she'd come to his ranch, weeks since the shame of her mother's trade had settled into something less like pain and more like a scar. Eli never spoke of it, never asked what had brought her to ruin. He treated her like a worker, not a sin to be hidden. It was a strange kind of mercy, one she didn't yet know how to accept. By noon, the frost had melted, turning the yard into a slick mire. Martha stood by the corral, sleeves rolled to her elbows, her dress dark with sweat and dirt. She had just finished hauling water, when Eli came from a barn, a coil of rope slung over his shoulder. "Fence is split down by the creek," he said. "I'll need your help." She hesitated. "I can't ride far." "I'll bring the wagon," he said simply. "You can hold the posts." The wagon groaned over uneven ground, wheels biting into soft mud. Martha sat beside him, one hand pressed to her belly, the other gripping the edge of the seat. The air smelled of pine and thawing earth. They reached the creek, a thin, fast-moving vein of water cutting through the plain. Eli stepped down, motioning for her to stay back while he inspected the fence. She watched him work, his movements sure and practiced. His size should have made him clumsy, but he handled tools with a craftsman's grace. When he turned to her, his face glistened with sweat, beard damp. "Hand me that post." She did, steadying it while he hammered. The impact vibrated up her arms, stirring something fierce in her chest, a strange pride that she could be useful again. When they finished, she looked across the horizon. "You ever get lonely out here?" Eli paused, pushing his hat back. "World's quieter this way." That ain't an answer. He gave a half smile, rare and fleeting. I had a wife once. Didn't last. She got sick. After that, quiet was all I had left. Martha's hand drifted to her belly. Quiet's heavy when you got no one to share it with. He looked at her then, eyes soft for the first time. You got the boy inside you. That's someone. The words hit her harder than any blow. She turned away, blinking against the wind. Maybe he'll grow up to hate me for bringing him into this world. Then teach him not to, Eli said simply. They rode back in silence, but the air between them had changed, no longer cold, but charged with something unspoken. That night, clouds gathered thick over the ridge. The wind howled through the gaps in the shutters, carrying the scent of rain and lightning. Martha had just finished cleaning the dishes when the first flash split the sky. Eli was still outside, tightening the barn doors. She hurried to the window. The rain came hard, hammering the roof in violent waves. She saw him struggling against the wind, his shirt plastered to his back, the horses screaming in their stalls. Without thinking, she grabbed a blanket and ran into the storm. "Eli!" she shouted, her voice lost of thunder. He turned just as a bolt struck a nearby tree, fire exploding through the air. The barn door blew open. The animals panicked. She didn't stop. She ran into the chaos, the smell of burning wood and wet hay choking her. A calf bawled from a corner, trapped beneath a fallen beam. Martha knelt, straining to lift it, her arms trembling. The beam wouldn't budge. "Help!" she cried, her voice cracking. Eli was there in an instant, shoving the wood aside like it weighed nothing. He caught her around the waist as the wall gave way behind them, pulling her clear just as flames licked the hayloft. They fell into the mud, gasping. "Are you out of your mind?" he barked, his voice raw. "I couldn't let it burn," she shot back, shaking, soaked to the bone. He stared at her, chest heaving. Then something in his face shifted, the anger melting into something else. "You could have died." "So could you," she whispered. They sat there a moment, rain pelting their faces, the barn burning itself down to embers. When he finally stood, he helped her up gently, his hand lingering on her arm. By morning, the fire was out. The damage was bad, but not ruinous. A few boards lost, some feed burned. Eli said little, only that they'd rebuild together. Martha didn't argue. She spent the day cleaning what she could, her body sore, but alive. That night, as she lay in bed, pain twisted through her belly, not sharp, but deep. She sat up, breathing hard, one hand pressing low against her stomach. Then came another wave, harder this time. The child was coming. She called out, but Eli was nowhere to be heard. Panic clawed at her chest. She tried to stand, her knees buckling. Sweat poured down her face as she gripped the table. The room spun. "Not yet," she gasped. "Please, not yet." Outside, the storm began again. Wind howled through the cracks, rattling the shutters. She lowered herself to the floor, teeth clenched as another contraction tore through her. Her mind flashed with her mother's face, her father's voice, the endless shame that had driven her here. "God help me," she whispered. Hours passed in agony. She screamed until her voice broke, until her hands bled from gripping the blanket. Then, through the haze of pain and lightning, she heard boots pounding on the porch. Eli burst through the door, soaked, breathless. Martha, she could barely lift her head. "The baby," she rasped. He dropped to his knees beside her, fumbling for towels, boiling water, anything he'd find. His hands trembled as he pressed a cloth to her brow. "You hold on, you hear me?" She cried out again, the sound raw and primal. Time vanished. There was only the firelight, the storm, and the rhythm of her breathing. When it was over, a thin wail pierced the air. Martha collapsed back, tears streaking her cheeks. Eli held the child, small and slick and screaming, his massive hands cradling the tiny life as though it might break. "It's a boy," he said softly. Martha reached out, weak but smiling through her tears. "Let me see him." Eli placed the baby in her arms. She looked down at the red, wrinkled face, the perfect hands. He's beautiful," she whispered. Eli sat back on his heels, exhaustion lining his face. He's alive. That's what matters. For a long while, they said nothing. The storm faded, leaving only the soft patter of rain on the roof. Martha rocked the baby against her chest, humming a tune she barely remembered. When she looked up, Eli was watching her, not with pity, but with something close to pride. "You did good," he said quietly. She smiled faintly. "Couldn't have done it without you." He shook his head. "You'd have managed. You're stronger than you think." The next morning, the world felt new. Mist hung over the fields, and the air smelled of wet earth and wood smoke. Martha fed the baby, wrapped him in an old flannel shirt, and carried him to the porch. Eli was fixing the fence, his movement slow from a night's ordeal. "He needs a name," she said. Eli leaned on the post. "You got one in mind?" "Samuel," she said after a moment. "My granddaddy's name. He was kind to me once." Eli nodded. "Samuel Harker's got a good sound to it." She looked up, startled. "Harker," he shrugged. "You and the boy need a name folks respect. Ain't nobody here to stop you take mine." Her throat tightened. "You don't have to do that." "I ain't doing it for me," he said. "World's hard enough. A name helps." She wanted to thank him, but couldn't find the words. So she just nodded and smiled. The days passed, quiet but full. Martha learned to mend tack, to churn butter, to shoot a rifle well enough to scare off coyotes. The baby grew strong. Eli built her a cradle from pine wood, carving it by lamplight when he thought she wasn't watching. One evening, as the sun sank red behind the hills, she found him sitting on the porch, sharpening his knife. He looked troubled. "What's wrong?" she asked. He nodded toward the horizon. "Smoke. Riders, maybe. Bandits been running through the valley lately. Took a herd from Cooper's ranch last week." Fear crawled through her. "Will they come here?" "They might." He stood, loading his rifle. "If they do, we'll be ready." That night, she couldn't sleep. She held Samuel close, listening for sounds in the dark. Every creak of the house made her flinch. Around midnight, she heard horses in the distance, faint but real. Eli was already awake, standing by the window. "They're close," he murmured. He pulled on his coat and grabbed a rifle. Martha rose, heart hammering. "What do I do?" "You stay here. Take the boy. If I don't come back, you ride north. Don't stop till you hit the river." She grabbed his arm. "You come back," she said fiercely. He met her eyes, the faintest smile beneath his beard. "I'll try." Then he was gone, stepping into the night. The door closed softly behind him. Martha waited, holding her breath. The baby whimpered. She rocked him, whispering prayers she didn't know she still remembered. Then the gunfire started, sharp cracks echoing across the hills. She clutched Samuel tighter. The shots grew louder, closer, until one split the night like lightning. Silence followed, long and heavy. Outside, the wind carried the smell of gunpowder and blood. Martha stood by the door, every muscle trembling, listening to the world beyond the walls. She didn't know if Eli was alive or dead, but she knew this much. If the men who came for him reached her door, she'd fight them herself. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the one being traded. She was the one worth fighting for. And as the last echo faded into the hills, she whispered into the darkness, "Please, God, bring him back." The first light of dawn broke over the hills, casting long, trembling shadows through the mist that clung to the valley. The ranch lay quiet, save for the low moan of the wind scraping against the barn door. Inside, Clara stirred beside the fire, her hand resting unconsciously on the swell of her belly. The child had started to move, faint but certain, like a whisper beneath her ribs. For the first time in months, she felt life rather than shame. Elias had been gone since before sunrise, riding toward the canyon to check the far pasture. He'd taken a rifle with him, his gait slower these days but steady, his shoulders hunched against the cold. Clara had begged him not to go. There had been signs of riders, strangers crossing the ridge, maybe drifters or bounty men. But Elias only grunted and said, "Ain't no man keeps my cattle but me." When she heard the hoofbeats echoing back hours later, her chest tightened. But the rhythm was wrong. Too many hooves, too uneven. She rose, clutching the blanket around her, and stepped out into the pale light. The wind hit her face, carrying the faint smell of smoke and sweat. 3 riders were approaching, and Elias was not among them. She froze. The lead rider wore a duster stained from travel, his hat pulled low. Behind him, another man grinned, showing gold teeth that caught the light like fangs. The third, a wiry one with eyes like burnt coal, carried a rifle lazily across his lap. "Morning, miss," the first one drawled, his voice scraping like sand. "Fine spread you got here. We're looking for a man. Big fella. Goes by the name Elias Boone. You seen him?" Clara's mouth went dry. "He's out with the cattle," she said softly. "He'll be back soon." The man smiled slow. "That so? Then we'll just wait a spell." He dismounted, boots crunching over the frostbitten grass. His gaze slid over her, lingering, ugly. Ain't proper for a lady to be all alone out here. Clara stepped back toward the cabin door. "I'm not alone." He laughed. "You will be soon." The door slammed in his face before he could blink. She bolted it, heart hammering so loud she could barely hear. Her eyes darted around the room. The rifle was gone. The knife, where was the knife? She snatched it from beside the hearth, her hand shaking, and backed away from the door. Outside, boots thudded on the porch. A voice muttered something. Then the sharp crack of wood splintering split the silence. The latch groaned, tore loose. Clara screamed. The door burst open. 2 of them pushed through, the third staying outside to keep watch. She slashed blindly, catching one across the cheek. He cursed and hit her so hard the room spun. She stumbled, fell against the table. The knife skittered away. "Easy, darlin'," the gold-toothed one said, pressing his boot against her chest. "We ain't come to hurt you, least not much. Just tell us where Boone keeps his money." She spat blood at his boot. "There ain't no money." He leaned down close, the stink of whiskey and tobacco choking her. "Then maybe we take something else." Before he could move, a thunderous crack split the air. The man jerked, eyes wide, then fell backward in a heap. His hat rolled across the floor, smoking where the bullet tore through. The second man spun toward the doorway, but another shot rang out, clean and deadly. He hit the wall, then slid down, leaving a smear of red behind. Elias filled the doorway, the rifle still smoking. His breath came heavy, his face carved from stone. The third rider outside took off at a gallop, dust flying. Elias raised a rifle, sighted down the barrel, but lowered it before pulling the trigger. "Coward will die on the run," he muttered. He turned toward Clara, and for a moment neither spoke. Her lip bled, her hair loose and wild. His eyes softened when he saw the bruise forming on her jaw. "You hurt bad." She shook her head. "No, but I thought you were dead." He gave a bitter half-smile. "Takes more than 3 jackals to put me under." He moved to her, brushed a thumb against her cheek. For a man who'd once lived by his fists, the touch was almost tender. They buried the 2 men behind a barn, under a sky streaked with red and ash. Elias said no words over them, only spat once, then turned back to the cabin. That night, the silence between them was different. It wasn't cold. It was heavy, filled with things unspoken. Clara sat by the fire, watching him clean the rifle. Every motion was careful, methodical. "They'll come back," she said. He nodded. "Probably. And if not them, more like M. Word travels fast when a man defends what's his." She looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Am I what's yours?" Elias froze. The firelight caught the scar running from his jaw to his ear, that pale reminder of everything he'd fought to survive. He set the rifle aside, rose, and crossed the room. "Reckon I don't own nobody," he said softly. "But if you're skin whether you belong here." "Yeah, you do." Her eyes glistened. "Even after what my mother did, after how folks see me." He shook his head. "Ain't no shame in surviving. Shame's for them that turn their backs." That night, while the wind howled outside, Clara lay awake, listening to the steady rhythm of his breath across the room. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel worthless. She felt seen. Days turned to weeks. The snow began to melt, revealing the stubborn green beneath. Clara learned the rhythm of the ranch. The creak of the barn door at dawn, the slow, patient way Elias spoke to the cattle, as though they were old friends. She cooked, mended, and even rode, though the saddle made her hips ache. Elias never laughed when she struggled. He only nodded, as if to say, "You'll get there." One evening, they rode out together to the ridge where the river cut through the canyon. The sunset painted everything gold and crimson. Clara dismounted, resting her hand on the curve of her belly. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. Elias squinted into the horizon. "Did plenty of that already. Never found peace till I stopped." She smiled faintly. "You think peace finds everyone?" He looked at her, eyes deep and unreadable. "Only the ones who stop running." Before she could reply, a distant crack shattered the calm. A rifle. The echo rolled to the canyon like thunder. Elias reacted instantly, shoving her down. "Stay low." He scanned the ridge. Another shot whistled past, striking the rock beside them. The horse screamed, rearing. Elias fired back, the sound deafening. Dust exploded near the ridge line, and a shadow moved. "Who is it?" Clara cried. "Don't know." He fired again, teeth bared. The assailant's horse bolted, riderless, disappearing into the scrub. Silence fell, only the river murmured below. Elias stayed crouched for a long moment before lowering his gun. His hand trembled slightly, though his voice remained calm. "Looks like the one that got away sent a friend." They returned to the cabin under a dying sun, the sky bruised and sullen. Clara's mind swirled with fear and fury. "They'll never stop," she whispered. "They'll keep coming, won't they?" Elias sighed, his voice heavy. "Maybe, but I got something to fight for now. That makes all the difference." That night, he packed supplies, ammunition jerky, a spare blanket. Clara watched him from the doorway. "Where you going?" "Gonna end this before it starts. Track whoever's left. Make sure they don't come back." She stepped forward, gripping his arm. "Please, you don't have to keep fighting for me." He turned, eyes fierce. "You don't understand. I ain't fighting for you, Clara. I'm fighting with you." Something in his voice cracked the wall she'd built around her heart. She didn't stop him when he left, but she prayed until dawn. 2 days passed. The world felt quieter without him. The wind slower, the birds muted. Clara worked the ranch as best she could, though each night she lit a lantern and left in the window. On the third morning, she woke to the sound of hoofbeats. Her heart leapt, but it wasn't Elias. Her mother stood there instead. The old woman's face was drawn tight, her eyes cold as slate. "So it's true," she hissed. "You live with that brute like some ranch whore." Clara stepped out, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "What do you want, Ma?" "I came to take you home." "There ain't no home," Clara said quietly. "Not for me. You sold me for a cow." The woman's jaw clenched. "You were a disgrace. You still are." Clara's voice rose, breaking like glass. "No, Ma, you're the disgrace." The slap came fast. The sting burned, but Clara didn't flinch. She stood her ground, the wind whipping her hair like a flag. "You can't hurt me no more," she said softly. A voice thundered from behind her. "You lay a hand on her again, I'll bury you next to the men behind the barn." Elias rode in, his coat torn, blood dried on his temple. His rifle was across his lap, his eyes blazing. The old woman stepped back, fear flickering through her face. "You can't keep her. She's mine." "No," Elias said, dismounting. "She's her own." He moved beside Clara, his hand brushing hers, rough against soft. The old woman's mouth twisted, but she said nothing more. She turned and rode away, the dust swallowing her whole. Clara stood trembling. When Elias reached for her, she didn't pull away. "What happened?" she asked softly. He looked toward the hills. "Found the man who shot at us. He won't be both there and nobody again." His tone was final. Weeks later, the baby came early. The storm outside raged, tearing at the roof. Elias boiled water, did as she told him, his big hands shaking. When the cry filled the cabin, he sank to his knees, laughing through tears. "It's a girl," Clara whispered, exhausted. "Ain't she beautiful?" He smiled. "Looks just like her ma." When the storm passed, dawn crept back over the hills. The world smelled of rain and new earth. Elias stood at the doorway, holding the child wrapped in a blanket. Clara watched him, her heart full in a way she'd never known. He turned, meeting her eyes. "You gave her life. Don't ever think you're less than that." She smiled through tears. "And you gave us a place to belong." He looked out across the land, gold light spilling over the valley. "Maybe belonging ain't something you find," he said softly. "Maybe it's something you build." And there, in that quiet dawn, amid the ashes of everything broken, they began again,